Welcome to Israel at War, the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. I'm Noah Slepkov, in for Yaakov Katz. About a week ago, Columbia University's Task Force on Antisemitism published its second report titled Columbia University Student Experiences of Antisemitism and Recommendations for Promoting Shared Values and Inclusion. The task force was created in December 2023 by the previous president of Columbia, Menushe Shafiq, to address the harmful impact of rising anti-Semitism on Columbia's Jewish community and to ensure that protection, respect, and belonging extends to everyone. The task force was created before the first encampments at Columbia were even assembled. The report begins by stating, quote, "The demonstrations that roiled our campus during the past academic year uncovered deep disagreements about the mission of our university. During those months, consensus around the university's formal rules and informal norms of behavior broke down, interfering with our charge to educate students and engage in research," unquote. The report, based on roughly 500 interviews, documents students' experiences on campus and offers concrete proposals to improve the campus climate. In order to help address the problem of anti-Semitism on campus, the task force defines anti-Semitism as follows. Anti-Semitism is prejudice, discrimination, hate, or violence directed at Jews, including Jewish Israelis. Anti-Semitism can manifest in a range of ways, including as ethnic slurs, epithets, and caricatures, stereotypes, anti-Semitic tropes and symbols, Holocaust denial, targeting Jews or Israelis for violence or celebrating violence against them, exclusion or discrimination based on Jewish identity or ancestry or real or perceived ties to Israel, and certain double standards applied to Israel. The task force said the definition was for use in training and education, not for discipline or as a means for limiting free speech or academic freedom. The recommendations in the report focus on three main areas: training and workshops, reporting mechanisms, and the rules governing student groups. To discuss this report and more, I'm joined today by two colleagues from JPPI, Professor Gil Troy and Dr. Sarah Yael Hirschhorn. Thank you for joining me.
Great to be with you.
All right, Professor Troy, tell us about this report. What do you make of it?
I found the report stunning. First of all, the sheer volume of complaints, the intensity to the hatred. A young woman puts up a mezuzah on her doorframe and people bang, bang, bang night after night until she feels she has to run off campus. The only good Zionist is a dead Zionist. The language, the intensity was really overwhelming reading it. Going into classrooms, and especially they said Israelis being harassed, not just by TAs, but by tenured professors. And then the tenured professors go and participate in these encampments. You go, what is going on? And put anti-Semitism aside, put anti-Zionism aside. The sheer lack of decency in that generation of students reflected in that report, the sheer lack of decency among these robots who are really good at getting A's and getting sky-high SAT scores, but have not been taught how to love, how to respect. And then there's not one incident of somebody standing up for them. So it's not just the bullies who disappointed me, who betrayed me, but their fellow students. And this whole culture of training, right? And in fact, the task force itself, I think, as they say, oh, well, the answer is, let's have better training. No, this isn't about training. When I rely on a training to be my moral guide, then I've actually given up my soul. And I'm only relying on a set of rules that come from me from an administrator. That's there. And reading it is, to me, just a devastating cultural critique of the modern university. And then to add to it, in these days of intense polarization, that you now have these weaponized approaches to politics, where if you are deemed to be, and we've been talking about this for a long time, but you see it, so strongly in the report, if you are deemed to be part of the white privileged class, then the DEI regime, which is, spending millions of dollars of student tuition money, is not going to stand up for you. So you add the cultural wasteland and the political aggressiveness, and you just go, wow, I got to take a shower.
Sarah?
Well, it's hard to follow up on those comments, but I found the report absolutely revolting, cataloging just, profound lack of empathy, total social dysfunction. But I think what really struck me was the lack of accountability by administrators who have decided that the social organization of students is really none of their business, that they have no interest or real intent in intervening in the climate, in the dorm room, in the cafeteria, in the informal spaces where students spend most of their lives. Perhaps they're willing to address issues that happen in university clubs that receive funding, but they don't want to make any effort to make the lives of students in the most important part of the university, which is the conversations that students have amongst themselves, and not just in the classroom, a place where Jews aren't subjected to violent and ongoing hostilities 24/7, night and day, as Gil said, with people banging on people's doors as they try to sleep for the crime of having mezuzah affixed to their doorpost. I thought that the university also, has substituted training for any form of real, I guess we could say, consequences. The student who remarked that, Zionists deserve to be dead, Haimani James, to my knowledge, has not been, removed from the university. He's still a student on the books. Professors who made comments in classrooms that verbally abused Israeli and Jewish students, they're not facing any consequences. They have the protections of tenure, and the university doesn't feel the need to intervene in that, even if it's very clear that it's creating a hostile climate and even a violent threat to some students. Moreover, these trainings have substituted what I think is a real desire to comply with Title VI, the statutory regulations by the federal government to avoid discrimination, and including, against religion and ethnicity. So these trainings are a kind of fig leaf for a real desire to make any changes in campus culture, and also just an attempt to avoid what they see coming down the pipe, which I think is endless lawsuits against the university for the hostile climate they've created. So I was very disappointed in this report, but also just absolutely appalled by the lack of real desire to intervene, given the catalog of brutality that Jewish and Israeli students faced over the course of the past year.
But isn't the report just the start of a process? I mean, you guys are negative on the workshops and training, but the point is to make people in the campus community understand this culture of hate that you're describing, and for the RAs that are the resident advisors that are working within the dorms to recognize this type of behavior, just the start of a process.
I don't think you can teach a resident, administrator that banging on the door of a student's room because they had a mezuzah on the post is a violation. If someone didn't intuitively understand that this is harassment, let's say this was an African-American student who had, I don't know, a symbol of African unity on their doorstep, and they had their door pounded on day and night. I think a residential administrator would understand that that's some form of abuse or some form of intimidation. The fact that they just don't get it, I think, is something you just fundamentally can't teach. As Gil said, this is just, a substitute for any kind of moral authority or, critical thinking on the part of individuals involved in administering the university. And these are the kinds of things that, you should have come to university understanding that was a problem, and that frankly, that was just like a profound lack of empathy and decency. And you just can't teach that.
As an educator, I kind of wish they had ended with a bit of a reading list from Aristotle to John Stuart Mill to Alan Bloom, saying learn how to be to ethics of the fathers, learn how to be a decent human being. Maybe the best thing to do would be for these anti-Semites to have to learn some Jewish texts about morality. But let me defend the report in that I think it's an important document, in that they did very thorough listening sessions. As a historian, it's a bad word, but grateful to them for capturing this moment and for also giving students an opportunity to tell their story, which is very important in kind of closing trauma and feeling like you're heard. and moving on. I also think there are certain parts of the report which are extremely helpful. Like, for example, a number of anti-Zionists who are complaining that they're being excluded from Hillel, which is a very interesting dilemma. And the report criticizes Hillel and says, no, they should be welcomed. But then what it does is it looks at the whole question of what is the centrality of Zionism to Jewish identity. And they very clearly say that just because there are some Jews who say Zionism isn't important to me, that doesn't mean that Jews can't say Zionism is important to me and is an essential part of our identity. And then they go even further. They say, similarly, there are many, many Jews who don't keep kosher. But that doesn't mean that if you discriminated against somebody who doesn't eat bacon, that it wouldn't be a form of anti-Jewish discrimination. So that argument I thought was very, very important. I also thought their argument, because one of the things they handle is this, again, insane thing that random clubs, which have nothing to do with the Middle East, were not only issuing statements denouncing Israel, but saying no Zionists allowed. And they said, take a random chess club. The chess club shouldn't have a statement and a stance on Zionism, pro or con, and certainly shouldn't be refusing to allow Zionists to join and play chess. And I think that's a very important statement in terms of saying, you can't, and it goes back to this whole politicization of everything, right? Certain people have politicized everything in the university and weaponized everything. And those parts of the report put boundaries and say, no, if we're going to be a community, and if we want to really talk about diversity and pluralism, we have to say the chess club focuses on chess and not on oppressor dynamics and not on Zionism.
Yeah, Sarah, isn't the point of the report to make changes to the rules that govern the university and campus life? I don't see the connection between the recommendations in the report and the Title VI. If there was a hate crime that took place at Columbia, why can't it be reported as a hate crime?
Because I think Title VI is supposed to address issues that are broader than a specific event or event that prevents a certain group from thriving within the university environment. So I thought that this was really, and there's a section in the report that's titled like basically trainings to prevent the necessity to use Title VI as the vehicle for these complaints. I thought it was really a diversion tactic to prevent or to obviate the need for Title VI complaints, and also I think to create a sense at the university that these shouldn't be escalated to Title VI complaints, when in fact many of the activities really may merit it, and that the trainings really may be insufficient to first address prior offense, which certainly are subject to Title VI, but also for ongoing activities that I think it was a sense of, we provided these trainings, so there couldn't possibly be a hostile climate that could come out of this. Well, we'll see what happens this academic year.
But isn't the point of the training to prevent those episodes and not to bury those? I mean, you're suggesting that because they're making people more aware that they're being offensive, that somehow it's going to prevent people from reporting on incidences when people were being offensive. I don't see how the two are connected, that someone can be trained not to be offensive and someone can also be offensive. And there's not the train is to help prevent the number of people who are offensive or make people recognize, hey, when you say Israel should be destroyed, that's offensive to people who are Jewish or Israeli. Getting people to understand that, how is that somehow preventing students from reporting incidences or being in an environment that's conducive to this?
Because I'm not entirely certain that there's going to be compliance with the trainings. University professors are often sent a lot of trainings that they're supposed to do, and how many of them actually participate in them and also don't object to the content within them. Similarly with students, residential heads, teaching assistants, and otherwise. Just because a training is offered doesn't mean that anyone feels bound by those trainings. And I also would like to know more about the content of those trainings. Antisemitism here was kind of ad hoc. It was something that does not explicitly embrace certainly the IRA definition of anti-Semitism or some of the more known quantity definitions of anti-Semitism that explicitly treat the question of Zionism. And also, when I saw the way the trainings were going to be phrased, it was, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in the same, in the same sentence, which has become a new sort of way of saying that anti-Semitism is not unique for many other kinds of hatreds. It seems like a general hatred training, perhaps, rather than a specific one that focuses on features of anti-Semitism. I don't know who's conducting these trainings. I don't know by what means and what tools. And I really don't know anything about whether, people are going to feel convinced by these trainings. It seems that, the encampments and demonstrations and protests have already started on campus, irregardless of these trainings that may perhaps be ongoing right now. So I'm not really confident in these trainings to necessarily achieve results. And to me, they seem more like a fig leaf than a path forward. The last thing I'd say about the trainings is that a lot of it was dedicated to issues that really weren't even about the specifics of any kind of hatred. They were just about restoring a kind of environment of discourse and dialogue, which I applaud and is certainly necessary on college campuses. But, we aren't there right now. This isn't a university culture that is willing to platform all views, that has open and fair debates. We're still in the middle of, a very serious cancel culture crisis in the academic community. And I'm not really sure that these trainings can intervene there. And there's no way to have a healthy climate when it comes to anti-Semitism if you're not addressing the fundamental issues of the dysfunction on campus and campus communities altogether. So the two issues are tied, and I'm not sure that these trainings can really do very much either on the specific questions or the general climate issues.
Gil, do you I mean, I think of the whole Me Too movement, how it led to sensitivity training, and for professors, like maybe there was a time where you were in your office with the door closed, and now you probably are thinking to yourself, okay, now I know that I'm in my office with a student, whoever the student is, I'm not closing my door. I leave my door open. I don't want to create that environment. In your experience as a professor, McGill, there's been all these different sensitivity training, maybe like, back in the day for homosexuality, and now for the Me Too movement, all this stuff. Do you think that they've been effective? And what is your response to Sarah's views on this?
So first of all, I just have to say that I always kept my door open from the time I started in the 90s. Because I thought it was important to just kind of be open and not have that creepy dynamic that too many professors had cultivated. So look, and this is actually one of the things I was thinking about, that, everybody likes to talk about how sexist and racist and homophobic things were 20 and 30 years ago. And there certainly were certain blind spots, but there also was a certain kind of decency in the culture. And then while there were occasionally cultural hiccups and everybody focuses on them today, they forget the fact that, I don't know, the academic world that I grew up in, well, it had its absurdities and its bizarre nature. There was a certain kind of mutual respect, and that's what I felt the report showed is so lacking. Now, on the question of training, I'm of two minds. On the one hand, there is something absurd of the Syrian Intifada, and we go, oh, let's do a training, and there's something truly absurd about that. But I think what I felt in the report was that these people who are very much a part of the institution, the people who've written the task, who participate in the task force, have served at Columbia 20, 30, 40 years, you sort of caught institutionally. Now, about 20 years ago, outsiders came to Columbia, did a film called Columbia Unbecoming, and got a lot of splash in the Jewish community, made it to the New York Times, but they actually triggered a kind of institutional defensiveness at Columbia because academics don't like outsiders. And I always looked at that story as a fascinating example of how not to trigger change in academia. So to the extent that these people are very much insiders, but also extremely appalled by nurses who on the campus health services who refuse to treat an Israeli student, and the Israeli student hears them debating for 10 minutes. Oh, you take her. No, I won't. No, I don't take her. I don't want to take her. I mean, that's insane, right? And it's that lack of decency. So I get that they kind of are going to training because that's the language of today. But I don't feel that the most important changes that occurred both in American culture or in academic culture to the better, in terms of the Me Too movement, in terms of having more respect for the story of gays and African Americans and others, I don't think it's because of the training. And in fact, what happened was with the training is that became this sort of way of just sort of deputizing the trainers to do the work, as they like to say, and think it through, and it didn't end up cultivating the soul. And I always believed, especially in the humanities, that the university is about cultivating the soul. And to see that this rot is actually thriving in the humanities shows how deep the crisis runs in the humanities and in the university.
But Sarah, what would you expect? You're hard on the report. You don't like the recommendations. What would you suggest the university does? Kick out anyone who's remotely has an opinion that could be perceived as anti-Semitic?
No, I mean, I think that there's needs to be kind of a judicious application of this new definition of anti-Semitism that they've come up with if they're going to use their own, their own ad hoc version. But look, there, first of all, I think the egregious consequences need to be disciplined. A student who says that, killing all the Zionists is fine and, tape records himself and uploads it to YouTube. I think that is a disciplinary violation, and the university needs to say Columbia is not an environment that wants to host this student's views, and that this student doesn't have the right to matriculate here.
Can I ask you a question? Does Ben-Gvir have the right to go to Columbia, or would he not be allowed because he's articulated views against, that are really extreme? Like, would you allow Ben-Gvir to study at Columbia?
It depends. Is Ben-Gvir uploading videos of himself saying "I'd like to kill all the Palestinians" while he's currently matriculated?
Extreme views.
Yes,
that many people find abhorrent, at the very least, and some people have said that it's very, very extreme, and so you basically want to, for Columbia to say, okay, this person has extreme views, they shouldn't be allowed to come here.
It's not just these people had, I'm sorry. It's not just these people had extreme views in the past, which may or may not be considered as part of the application to university being accepted to matriculate. But this happened, on Columbia property using Columbia IT networks disseminated through Columbia social media. I mean, I think these things matter, that it's, happening on the campus, in addition to, I guess, past bad acts. But certainly, I'd also say that, if Kahanists are marching through campus, as seemed to have happened at the University of Toronto last week, I have no more, sympathy or acceptance for that than for, mobs chanting Hamas slogans. I mean, I think certainly fair application is important, but consequences also matter. I think it's also a question of taking up the issue of what's happening with the faculty. And I'm sorry that this is something that makes people very uncomfortable. And it goes back to the Columbia Unbecoming episode that Professor Troy alluded to, which is at the time, it was already known that there were certain professors who were making these kinds of statements in the classroom, and another 20 odd years passed until this has reemerged as a, I guess, a fount of some of the activities that are happening at Columbia today. Is this going to be seriously tackled? Are professors, essentially allowed to say whatever crosses their mind in the classroom because of the protections of tenure, even when it's very obvious that this has created a hostile environment towards Jewish and Israeli students, even perhaps inspired, acts of verbal or, physical violence against them by their classmates following the class? I think these issues need to face some kind of disciplinary action. And I understand that, there's a lot of concerns that this leads down a very slippery slope on the campus. But at the same time, I think that if some of these kinds of comments were addressed to other ethnic groups, if we had professors in the classroom making bigoted remarks towards African-American students or intimidating African-American students, even asking them, on some cases in other university campuses, asking them to stand in the corner to apologize, for the genocide that their people are committing, I don't think that would fly. And I think we have to have, equal standards. And part of the problem here is that not all speech is equal. And we're very aware of that. And these trainings can't address that, address the hand on the scale of what's happening in the classroom or outside of it. And, no one comes into a training and, leaves it usually with a complete, recalculation of their entire moral and ideological compass. So I think there's a limit to what that kind of, I guess, efforts can do.
Yeah, I wanted to quote some not very wise women and say it all depends on the context, right? Politicians are certainly free to run their mouths off in a politics of the street. The politics of university is slightly different because it's a private public space. And especially what was so damning about the phrase "it all depends on the context." The context of the modern university is we've been complaining for years about zero tolerance for all kinds of what we used to call free speech. That they had a whole, list of macroaggressions and microaggressions and triggering phrases and vocabulary words that you weren't supposed to use anymore. And then all of a sudden, when it came to the Jews, these people fell in love with free speech. And so the hypocrisy and the inability to hold a consistent line, I think, is the problem. And I completely agree with Sarah that, I always just do blacks to women, to gays, to Asians. There's zero tolerance for even looking at someone the wrong way, as there should be in the modern university, except when it comes to Jews. And one of the most powerful points I thought made in the task force report was that a student said one of the problems was that they let it get out of hand. That had they punished a number of what Sarah called egregious cases early on, it wouldn't have so escalated. And the passivity of the administration, and one thing that I didn't pick up on the report, which was surprising to me, was the degree to which they gave so many people a pass when it came time for graduation. To me, again, put Israel aside, put Judaism aside, actions have to have consequences. That's one of the key things young 20-something-year-olds need to learn in universities. And there's this weird intersection of the coddling of the American mind and the coarsening of the American mind, and it's resulted in hundreds of Columbia students paying $86,400 a year, whatever it is, feeling unsafe, feeling harassed. And that's insane, and that's unacceptable. And it shouldn't have been a bunch of Jews on the report. I think there were one or two non-Jews. It should have been members of the Columbia community saying, this is unacceptable. These are clear red lines of decency that are being crossed again and again and again, encouraged by professors, egged on by graduate students, and validated by lazy administrators who, when one student comes and asks for help, is sent first to the social worker because they must have mental health issues, as opposed to being sent to the mechanisms that would protect the student and find the bully.
I wanted to bring up some criticism of the report by a handful of Jewish faculty, which I think is it really encapsulates the problem. So they write in a letter to the administration. They write, the alarming incidents reported by the task force and its far-reaching recommendations are already being widely circulated as evidence of Columbia's horrific campus climate of rampant anti-Semitism and a long-standing bias on the part of students and faculty and of administrative failure to address this problem. The report is thus already doing serious harm to Columbia's reputation. But when the report is read closely, considerable flaws become apparent. And basically, they go on to say that they miss the context that the anti-Semitism was coming out of, which is this war. Now, their criticism that the report is making Columbia look bad is I don't understand what they're trying to say, that either that it's not true or that it's true and it's making us look bad. I assume that the former, but what do you say to the fact that, okay, this is a war, and we want our side to win, the Palestinians want their side to win, and both are engaged in this war. And the stuff happening on campus is part of this bigger war struggle. And if we ignore that there's this war taking place, then we're really not understanding the context of the situation. What do you make of this thinking?
I think the war is irrelevant to the question of behavior on campus. All kinds of terrible things happen in the world, and we want our students to be responsive. We want our students to have a conscience. We want our students to be political. We also want them to respect one another. And, there's this false analogizing of, the encampments were just like the 1960s. No, the 1960s, they were fighting against the man. They were fighting against the establishment. They weren't fighting against their fellow students. They weren't harassing their dorm mates. They weren't harassing their neighbors. The inability of people to see that is fascinating. Now, one of the things I love about the letter that you just read is welcome to the Ivy League. The obsession with reputation, the obsession with how we look, the degree to which too many educational decisions these days are made based on how will it affect our rankings, shows in that opening paragraph. Oh my goodness, what are people going to say about us? Not, oh my goodness, the reputational damage wasn't done by the report. The reputational damage was done by the hooliganish behavior of these goons. And it's misplaced indignation. The indignation should be against people who chose to hijack the holiness of their educational platform and turn them into political podiums, and more than that, turn them into communist re-education camps. And then the little campus commissars they sent out to harass people. That's the problem. And it's too easy to kind of blame what Israel's doing to Gaza in the Middle East when, wars happen. But that the war shouldn't have been brought home in that way. And once it started to be brought home that way, you needed leadership to say, this is not what we do. And they spend so much time talking about our community and centering ourselves in the community and the beauty of the community, and read all their propaganda booklets where they, are telling the parents, yeah, you're getting your $86,400 worth because of the specialness of the community and the diversity and the pluralism. This is what pluralism looks like. This is what diversity looks like. This is what community looks like. No siree.
What I take issue with, and Sarah, I'd love your take on this, is that in this letter of dissent, they characterize the protests as anti-war protests, and I think that is so funny that they just don't understand what these protests are about. They're literally the opposite and of an anti-war. They are pro-war. They are protesting a war to destroy. They are protesting for a war to destroy Israel. They literally say in their protests, free Palestine, Intifada revolution, calling for the destruction of Israel. That's not anti-war. That is pro-war. And any classification of the protests as being anti-war is quite comical.
Look, again, I think it's an effort to try to recast this as, 1960s part two, which it certainly isn't. Also, most of the campus protests, not all, but most of the campus protests in the 1960s were nonviolent. Here we've seen incidences of, vandalism, hate crimes, taking the janitor hostage in Hamilton Hall while the building was being, basically wrecked. Incidences of physical violence against an Israeli student. This isn't the 1960s in terms of, what's taking place here. Also, I think there's a double standard. If, we're talking about this as being an anti-war protest, where's the, folio of, of a listening session of Jewish students and Zionist students attacking Palestinian protesters? Do we have, hundreds of incidents of the same, tenor of which, this document reports? We don't. So to cast this as, just the product of culture seems really misguided, and I think seems to be an attempt or some kind of nostalgia for the 1960s without understanding that, fundamentally this isn't about kind of the moral struggles of the 1960s. This is about, direct kind of internecine warfare between students and faculty on campus. And last but not least, about the faculty, there is now a report from a law professor at Columbia, who is one of the main agitators on campus from the pro-Palestinian faculty perspective against these Jewish professors who wrote about this report. So the community of scholars here has clearly also been shattered by these events, and any sense of community and reputation and dignity seems to be really be beyond the point here. There's no sense of community left at Columbia from what I read in this report. All there is warfare amongst various tribes and sects within the university.
All right. Well, for our listeners, and our people watching, if you want, just Google the Columbia University Task Force on Antisemitism. You'll find the report. Read it for yourself. Before we go, I just want to say that, Gil, you have a book coming out, To Resist the Academic Intifada, Letters to My Students on Defending the Zionist Dream. When can people, when is this going to hit the bookshelves?
September 17th, next week.
And Sarah, you have a new book coming out called New Day in Babylon and Jerusalem, Zionism, Jewish Power, and Identity Politics.
It's going to be quite a while, but I'm working hard on it, and it really tries to trace this trajectory from the 1960s to the present. So hopefully, when I finally finish it, it may be somewhat relevant to what's happening in the news cycle these days.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining us. Thank you for our listeners for tuning in. And remember that you can find us anywhere you get your podcast and on YouTube.